At that exact moment, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps launched a ballistic missile toward Kuwait. This was not a drone attack. It was not a naval harassment operation involving fast boats or mines in the Strait of Hormuz. It was a ballistic missile aimed at Kuwait, a nation that had worked hard to remain as neutral as possible while war unfolded nearby. The target was an airbase hosting thousands of United States Air Force personnel. It was the same installation that came under Iranian ballistic missile attack during the opening phase of Operation Epic Fury on February 28th. It was also the same location struck by a drone on April 6th, an incident that injured 15 Americans. Kuwait's Patriot PAC-3 air defense system successfully intercepted the incoming missile. The engagement resulted in a complete destruction of the threat. At nearly the same time, American forces eliminated 5 Shahed drones operating in and around the Strait of Hormuz. A 6th drone never managed to take off. As preparations began for its launch near Bandar Abbas, American forces struck the Iranian ground control facility responsible for the operation before the aircraft could become airborne. The operators effectively revealed their own position. The control link used for Drone 6 activated while drones 1 through 5 were already flying and already being engaged. That transmission exposed a radio frequency signature that could be detected, identified, and located by the F-16 CJ HARM targeting system in real time. The AGM-88 HARM missile locked onto that emission source and traveled toward it at Mach 2. The final communication transmitted from that control station was received by a missile homing directly toward it. 6 drones, 1 ballistic missile. Every one of those threats was either intercepted or destroyed before accomplishing any military purpose. The following morning, United States Central Command issued a statement containing a single word that immediately drew attention across the region. The word was egregious. The statement declared that United States Central Command and regional partners remained alert and measured while continuing to protect personnel and interests against unjustified Iranian aggression. That single word carried significant weight on May 28, 2026. Over the next 72 hours, its significance would become even clearer. This should not be viewed as just another ceasefire violation. What occurred that night was fundamentally different because of the chosen target. Earlier violations centered on activities in the Strait of Hormuz. They involved drone swarms, maritime harassment, mine-laying operations, and attacks against shipping routes. Those actions targeted either American military assets or commercial infrastructure located inside the established operational environment of the conflict. Kuwait represented something different. Kuwait was not an active participant in the fighting. For 89 days, the country had attempted to avoid direct involvement, despite being located beside the conflict zone. American forces were stationed there as part of long-standing security arrangements common throughout the Gulf region. However, Kuwait had not taken part in offensive military operations connected to the war. Iran launched a ballistic missile at Kuwaiti territory while negotiations were underway in Doha, and while Iranian diplomats were physically present at the discussion table. With that launch, Iran accomplished something no amount of American diplomatic effort had managed during the previous 89 days. It unified Gulf opposition. Kuwait described the strike as a dangerous escalation. Bahrain issued condemnation. Saudi Arabia did the same. The Gulf Cooperation Council, an organization not known for immediate unanimity on military matters, rapidly moved into collective condemnation within hours. 1 ballistic missile, a complete Gulf coalition response. This was the type of strategic error that emerges when desperation begins replacing careful calculation. To understand why, the sequence of events during the 18 hours stretching from the evening of May 27th into the morning of May 28th must be examined in order. The story began with 5 one-way attack drones launched by Iran. The systems were almost certainly Shah 136 or Shah 238 models. These platforms fit the IRGC's asymmetric warfare approach because they combine semi-autonomous navigation, relatively small radar signatures, and low production costs. That combination creates a favorable cost-exchange ratio, a central principle of asymmetric military doctrine. 5 drones entered the airspace over and around the Strait of Hormuz. American forces intercepted every one of them. The engagement process reflected a deliberate approach to force economy. A Patriot PES. 3 interceptor costs approximately $3 million. A Shahed drone costs approximately $20,000. That cost comparison alone influences engagement decisions. According to available reporting, the drones were destroyed by American aircraft and potentially by advanced systems, including high-powered microwave weapons and high-energy laser technology. Such systems represent an emerging generation of counter-drone capability that has been moving toward operational maturity throughout the 89-day conflict. Ship-based Helios laser platforms, microwave weapons, and airborne counter-drone systems provide engagement options that dramatically reduce costs compared with traditional missile interceptors. The result is a defense architecture capable of making large-scale Shahed swarm attacks financially unsustainable for an increasingly strained IRGC budget. All 5 drones were eliminated. The 6th drone was never launched. Its destruction occurred through a different process. As the ground control site near Bandar Abbas activated communications for Drone 6, it generated precisely the signal environment the F-16CJ and its HARM targeting equipment are designed to exploit. The ASQ-213 targeting pod can passively detect, identify, and locate electromagnetic emissions from radar systems and command facilities while remaining at operational standoff ranges. The instant the Iranian operators activated the uplink, they exposed their own location. Their radio transmission became a beacon. The AGM-88 HARM missile then homed directly toward that source at Mach 2. The operator's control signal effectively became the targeting data. This was suppression of enemy air defenses doctrine applied directly to a modern drone warfare environment. The F-16CJ Wild Weasel aircraft and its Angry Kitten cognitive electronic warfare pod were specifically designed for this type of mission. The software can be reprogrammed between sorties to address the exact electromagnetic signatures being used by current adversaries. Because the system employs cognitive electronic warfare capabilities, it continually updates its threat library from operational experience. After 89 days of combat activity, Iranian command and control emissions were no longer unfamiliar signals. They had become recognized patterns. Detection, classification, and geolocation could occur almost immediately after transmission began. From the moment the uplink activated, the control facility had little chance of survival. Reports of explosions east of Bandar Abbas the next morning provided physical evidence of the outcome produced by that targeting chain. The ballistic missile interception over Kuwait also deserves close examination. The Patriot PAC-3 differs substantially from earlier Patriot variants, whose performance against ballistic missile threats was more limited. PAC-3 relies on hit-to-kill technology. Rather than detonating nearby and relying on fragmentation, the interceptor physically collides with the incoming missile. At the closing speeds involved in a ballistic missile engagement, the impact itself generates enough energy to destroy the warhead before it reaches its intended target. Kuwait's Patriot PAC-3 network successfully carried out that mission. The intercept was confirmed by United States Central Command. The operators responsible for that battery demonstrated the training and readiness required to stop a ballistic missile aimed at their country, while peace negotiations were actively taking place, and Iranian diplomats remained in Doha. Their actions likely prevented a mass casualty event at a base housing thousands of American personnel. That outcome explains why the word egregious carried both legal and moral implications. The operators described the engagement as a clean kill. For professionals whose mission is turning incoming ballistic missiles into harmless debris before they can reach protected personnel, such an interception represents the successful execution of their responsibilities. One individual stands at the center of the operational picture from that night. His name is Brigadier General Sayed Majid Musavi. He serves as commander of the IRGC Aerospace Force. Musavi assumed that position on June 14, 2025. He took command 11 days after an Israeli airstrike killed his predecessor. Since then, he has overseen Iran's missile and drone forces while carrying the memory of that event into every major operational decision. He was the commander responsible for the choice to launch a ballistic missile at Kuwait on May 27, 2026, while Iranian negotiators sat in Doha. Understanding where the conflict may be headed requires understanding that decision. The action was not random, it was deliberate. Musavi appears to have been attempting to project strength. The goal was likely to demonstrate to both domestic audiences and international observers that the IRGC still possessed the capability to threaten Gulf states with ballistic missiles regardless of any agreements being discussed by diplomats in Doha. Musavi's objective was to provoke a reaction from Washington that Tehran could later portray as an overreach and use during negotiations to seek concessions. He was attempting to determine how far American restraint could be pushed. The goal was to find the exact threshold where provocation would trigger hesitation instead of an immediate military response. Such an outcome would provide the IRGC with a narrative claiming that continued resistance was delivering diplomatic gains. Instead, the result was very different. Kuwait labeled the strike a dangerous escalation. Bahrain issued condemnation. Saudi Arabia followed with its own condemnation. Within only a few hours, the Gulf Cooperation Council had moved into full opposition. One ballistic missile, a united Gulf coalition standing against him. That outcome was clearly not the intended result of the operation planned for that night. Treasury Secretary Besson's statement released the following morning offered perhaps the clearest indication of how Washington viewed both the Doha negotiations and the missile and drone attacks. He wrote that Iranian troops were not being paid. Police officers were failing to report for duty. Karg Island was shutting down. The national currency was collapsing. And during active peace negotiations, Iran fired a ballistic missile at a neutral nation while its economy deteriorated in real time. He concluded that this was not a display of strength. It was desperation presented as deterrence. The significance of that message extends beyond the missile launch itself. Besson was outlining the economic backdrop that makes the launch understandable within a broader strategic context. The attack on Kuwait was not the behavior of an organization negotiating from a position of confidence. It was the action of an organization facing unpaid troops, absent police personnel, a major oil terminal approaching shutdown, and a currency in freefall. Under those conditions, the most visible remaining instrument of power becomes military spectacle. Ballistic missiles create spectacle. They are costly. They can be intercepted. And when one is launched at a neutral state during active negotiations, the resulting drama resembles an effort to control public perception rather than the conduct of a government operating from a position of strategic flexibility. The restoration of internet access inside Iran provides another important piece of the domestic picture. Its timing, occurring alongside the missile launch, reveals much about how the regime views its hold on the population. For most of the conflict's 89 days, internet access across Iran has remained heavily restricted. The blackout served a familiar purpose. It limited the spread of information that could allow citizens to compare experiences of economic hardship, political pressure, and military setbacks. Without those shared discussions, widespread frustration is less likely to develop into organized opposition. Yet the blackout carried a cost. The same restrictions also prevented state messaging from reaching approximately 90 million Iranians. Government-controlled narratives remain one of the regime's primary tools for maintaining political legitimacy. Citizens unable to access official media cannot receive messages promoting resistance, condemning foreign adversaries, or highlighting claimed military successes. Those narratives are intended to transform economic suffering into political acceptance. The decision to restore internet access suggests the leadership concluded that its influence over public opinion was eroding more rapidly than the blackout could compensate for. The timing of that shift is significant. A ballistic missile launched outward. Internet access restored inward. Together, those actions provide one of the clearest indicators available of the IRGC's institutional mindset on May 28, 2026. The missile was intended to project strength externally. The restored internet allowed propaganda efforts to resume domestically. Both actions represent attempts to address declining legitimacy through different mechanisms. One targets foreign audiences. The other targets the population at home. The divisions inside the IRGC itself form another important layer of the story. Throughout the negotiation phases of the conflict, tensions have existed between civilian diplomats and hardline IRGC factions. Ghalibaf was removed. Jalili was elevated. Fahidi strengthened IRGC authority. The supreme leader reportedly communicates through motorcycle couriers, while remaining in an undisclosed bunker. Against that backdrop, IRGC Aerospace Force Commander Musavi launched a ballistic missile at Kuwait, while Iranian negotiators remained in Doha. When different branches of the same system undertake actions that appear disconnected from one another, it often signals fragmentation rather than coordination. The diplomats in Doha were unlikely to have approved such a launch. Had they done so, they would have understood the likely consequences. The strike generated unified Gulf condemnation. It prompted CENTCOM to label the action egregious. It strengthened the American position at the negotiating table. Those outcomes offered no advantage to the diplomatic effort. The commanders responsible for the launch appeared to be acting independently of the civilian negotiation track. This reflects the type of behavior often seen when competing centers of authority operate without effective coordination. Different institutions begin making separate decisions. A functional leadership structure normally prevents those conflicts. According to this interpretation, the supreme leader's reliance on courier communications from a bunker is not providing the real-time direction needed to align military and diplomatic efforts. As a result, a missile launch undermined negotiations. At the very moment those talks were approaching a potential written agreement. Such an agreement could have ended the blockade and restored oil revenues. Those revenues, in turn, would have supported IRGC payroll obligations. The divisions are becoming increasingly visible. When those divisions appear at the operational level and directly damage diplomatic progress, they suggest an organization losing strategic coherence and falling back on the instincts of its most aggressive faction. Attention then shifts to two international developments that help frame the broader strategic environment surrounding the events of that night. The first involves the American Tomahawk missile inventory. Recent reports indicate that roughly 30% of the pre-war stockpile of Tomahawk land attack missiles has been expended during 89 days of combat operations. Raytheon currently manufactures approximately 200 Tomahawks annually under peacetime production schedules. If 30% of available inventory has been used in less than 3 months of conflict, production levels will need substantial expansion to maintain adequate stockpiles. The challenge extends beyond Iran. Any future contingency involving the Taiwan Strait would rely upon many of the same weapons. Taiwan's ability to acquire Tomahawk missiles could be affected by the inventory reductions created by the Iran conflict. F-35. Operations near the Taiwan Strait, carrier strike groups deployed across the Western Pacific, and the broader deterrence framework supporting American Taiwan policy all depend upon the same missile inventory. The Iran campaign and Taiwan contingency planning are drawing from a shared production pipeline. Both demand high readiness. Both require significant inventories. Raytheon can increase output, but meaningful expansion requires time. That timeline intersects with the 60-day nuclear window connected to Iran and with the operational tempo of pressure campaigns around the Taiwan Strait. The overlap reflects the kind of simultaneous pressure architecture that adversarial coordination strategies are designed to create. The second major international development involves Ukraine. In the 4 weeks ending on May 26, 2026, Russian forces experienced a net loss of 100 square miles of Ukrainian territory. It was Russia's largest monthly territorial setback of the year. The figure was nearly 4 times greater than the previous reporting period. For the first time during the war, Ukraine is now conducting more daily assaults than Russia. Moscow's response to this battlefield trend has included the movement of nuclear warheads into Belarus. This is nuclear signaling. The Kremlin is losing ground while attempting to gain psychological advantage through nuclear messaging. The purpose is to influence Western calculations regarding continued support for Ukraine. Russia's transfer of nuclear warheads into Belarus, while simultaneously losing 100 square miles in a single month, follows a recognizable pattern. It reflects a government seeking to offset conventional military difficulties through escalation signaling. The comparison being drawn is that Iran's missile strike against Kuwait serves a similar function. Both actions are presented as responses to declining effectiveness in conventional military operations. Both rely on dramatic measures intended to preserve perceptions of strategic importance. Russian battlefield losses and Iran's missile launch become parallel developments unfolding in separate theaters. The broader adversarial network is experiencing one of its weakest periods, while simultaneously generating some of its strongest escalatory signals. As of May 28, 2026, the status of the 60-day nuclear window must also be evaluated in light of the previous night's events. The diplomats were meeting in Doha. The missile was launched at Kuwait during those discussions. The Gulf states that had been applying diplomatic pressure on Iran to complete an agreement are now united in condemnation against the government responsible for the strike. For months, pressure from Gulf states served as the steady diplomatic force behind every ceasefire extension, every negotiating pause, and every 48-hour opening that allowed talks to continue moving toward a written agreement. That dynamic changed after the missile launch. The strike transformed regional pressure that had been aimed at accommodation into pressure directed toward a response. Kuwait, Bahrain, and Saudi Arabia were no longer operating from the same position they held when urging President Trump to delay military action so negotiations could continue. Now they were responding as Gulf nations that had just witnessed one of their members targeted by a ballistic missile during active peace talks. That shift in posture represents the diplomatic consequence reflected in CENTCOM's description of the incident as egregious. The wording carries implications for the next major decision facing American policymakers on May 28, 2026. The agreement itself remains alive because mine-clearing operations are continuing. The nuclear framework still operates under a 60-day timeline. Yet the IRGC missile strike altered the environment surrounding those 60 days. A missile fired at a neutral state during negotiations inevitably affects the thinking of every participant who had been advocating for diplomatic success. One element of the proposed arrangement remains particularly important. American officials introduced a new option regarding uranium disposition. Instead of requiring removal from Iranian territory, the material could be destroyed inside Iran under IAEA supervision. The proposal was designed to satisfy 2 competing requirements. It respected the Supreme Leader's directive that the uranium remain within the country. At the same time, it addressed Washington's insistence that the material not remain available for weapons development. That flexibility existed before the missile attack. Whether it still exists after the ceasefire violation documented by CENTCOM is now one of the central diplomatic questions. The next 24 hours will begin providing answers. Statements and actions from key officials will reveal whether the 60-day framework remains intact or whether the previous night's events accelerate movement toward Plan B. Preparation for that alternative had already been reflected through Memorial Day weekend Situation Room activity and Secretary Rubio's NATO meeting in Helsingborg. Meanwhile, Bandar Abbas continues to occupy a central place in the military picture. The region remains the primary concentration point for Iran's surviving naval and missile capability after 89 days of conflict. Underground facilities near Bandar Abbas are believed to house submarines, fast attack vessels, and drone assets that remain operational. Ground control locations in the area are also being continuously monitored. The electronic emissions generated by those facilities are being tracked, cataloged, and analyzed by the F-16CJ's Angry Kitten electronic warfare system during each mission. Reports of explosions east of Bandar Abbas on the morning of May 28th confirmed the strike against the Drone 6 control site. Surveillance activity throughout the region continues at a high level. P8. Poseidon aircraft operating over Bandar Abbas and Karg Island have been building an acoustic targeting picture of underwater contacts since the beginning of the conflict. Lamprey tracking systems remain active within the water column. Towed array sonar signatures, collected by Arleigh Burke destroyers, continue contributing to the operational picture. Below the surface, Virginia-class nuclear attack submarines maintain their presence. Across the theater, surveillance and strike assets remain concentrated on Bandar Abbas because it represents the center of gravity for Iran's remaining asymmetric military capability. Brigadier General Mousavi remains responsible for the missile and drone network. He assumed command 11 days after his predecessor was eliminated in an airstrike. Today, he continues directing operations through whatever command infrastructure survived earlier attacks and remains available for future missions. The economic dimension of the previous night's operations is equally revealing. 6 drones were intercepted or destroyed before reaching their intended targets. 1 ballistic missile was also intercepted. The IRGC expended 6 drones and 1 ballistic missile. 5 Shahed. 136 drones at approximately $20,000 each represent roughly $100,000. The 6th drone, along with a destroyed ground control infrastructure, increased the total cost further. The ballistic missile, launched at Kuwait, added another expense ranging from hundreds of thousands to millions of dollars depending on the specific variant employed. The overall expenditure consumed a meaningful portion of the already strained resources described by Besson when discussing unpaid troops and absent police personnel. The outcome was stark. No military objectives were achieved. A united Gulf coalition emerged in condemnation. CENTCOM documented the incident as egregious. A drone control facility was destroyed. A Kuwaiti Patriot battery recorded a successful engagement. From a cost exchange perspective, the outcome was overwhelmingly unfavorable for the IRGC. Such results often accompany organizations operating under pressure. The objective becomes demonstrating continued existence and capability rather than achieving meaningful military effects. Weapons are launched. They are intercepted. The launch infrastructure is then targeted. The cycle repeats. Another major element of the previous night's events involves emerging defensive technology. The conflict with Iran is accelerating the operational maturity of high-powered microwave weapons and directed energy systems, at the same time that Tomahawk inventory reductions are creating pressure for increased production and broader defense industrial mobilization. Systems such as Thor can defeat drone swarms by damaging electronic components across multiple targets simultaneously. Unlike traditional interceptors, a separate missile is not required for each drone. If some of the Shahed drones engaged over the Strait of Hormuz on May 27th were intercepted, using microwave technology deployed aboard American vessels, the cost per engagement would have been substantially lower than conventional alternatives. High-energy laser systems, such as Helios, offer another approach. These weapons can burn through drone structures at the speed of light. The energy cost for each shot may be only a few dollars in electricity, rather than the millions associated with certain missile interceptors. Using PAC-3 interceptors against Shahed drones would be economically inefficient. Directed energy systems provide a lower-cost solution. Together, laser and microwave weapons create an effective defense against drone swarms, whilst PAC-3 systems remain optimized for ballistic missile threats. This layered architecture has been refined continuously through 89 days of operational experience against the IRGC's preferred weapon systems. The Angry Kitten electronic warfare software continues receiving updates between missions. Directed energy targeting algorithms are adjusted after every engagement. Signal characteristics collected from Iranian drone operators have been thoroughly documented after 89 days of observation. The asymmetric warfare model developed by Iran over 4 decades is now confronting an American counter-asymmetric adaptation process. Under intense operational conditions, each day of combat generates additional lessons. Each engagement contributes new data. The results from May 27, 2026 are measured against a simple outcome. 6 drones launched, 1 ballistic missile launched, 0 military objectives achieved. When all available threads are assembled together, the broader picture of May 28, 2026 becomes clearer. Iranian diplomats were in Doha offering commitments. At the same time, missile and drone units were operating from Bandar Abbas. After the events of the night, only one side of that equation remained operationally effective. CENTCOM confirmed strikes against Iranian military facilities. The term egregious entered official military language. The 60-day nuclear timeline continues. The IAEA destruction-in-place proposal remains available. IRGC personnel remain unpaid. Police officers continue failing to report for duty. Karg Island continues moving toward shutdown. The currency remains in free fall. Storage tanks are nearing capacity. Mine hunting forces remain positioned in Port Said and prepared for deployment. The Gulf Coalition now stands united in condemnation following a single ballistic missile attack against Kuwait. Russia continues moving nuclear warheads into Belarus, while losing 100 square miles per month in Ukraine. American Tomahawk inventories remain reduced by 30% and require expanded production. Ukraine is experiencing its strongest month of the war. China has evacuated its citizens from Iran and identified UAE oil supplies as a seamless alternative. Across all three major nodes of the adversarial network, pressure is increasing simultaneously. Brigadier General Musavi, who witnessed the loss of his predecessor and has managed the missile network ever since, chose that particular night to launch a ballistic missile toward Kuwait, while sending 5 drones over the Strait of Hormuz as diplomats negotiated in Doha. The pattern remains familiar. Iran launches, American defenses intercept, CENTCOM targets launch infrastructure. Iran announces success. The blockade remains. Storage tanks continue filling. Payroll obligations remain unmet. Police personnel remain absent. And the 60-day timeline continues moving toward either a written nuclear agreement that ends the crisis or an expiration point that restarts the confrontation under conditions that Iran's remaining capabilities appear no better prepared to manage than they were during the interception of 5 drones and 1 ballistic missile on the previous night. The window remains 60 days. The decision remains the same. Negotiation or the alternative. Share your thoughts and analysis on these developments and stay tuned for continuing coverage as the 60-day window moves forward and the next phase of this crisis begins to take shape. Please leave your thoughts about this content in the comments below. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.